Vedai Sangapada Kramopanishadaihi Gayantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyandiyam Yogino Yasyantam Navidusura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Om Sudhismati Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. We are now discussing the 18th verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita with Shankaracharya's commentary. So I shall read the verse first and then discuss the commentary, the Bhashyam. Antavanda ime dekha nityasyukta sharirinaha anashino aprameyasya tasmad ityasya bharat. He Bharata, ime dekha antavanta nityasya anashinaha aprameyasya sharirinaha taha tasmad tvam yudhyaswa. This is the verse, the 18th verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So, the Lord is saying, all these embodied beings are equipments or outer covers of the embodied eternal self or Atman, which is Nitya, Avinashi and Aprameya. Nitya means eternal, Avinashi means indestructible, and Aprameya means incomprehensible, in the sense that this Atman cannot be perceived or comprehended by the mind and the five senses of perception. It doesn't mean that it is unknown. What it means is, this Atman is beyond cognition at the empirical level. We cannot fully understand the nature of this eternal Atman by any of the pramanas, pratyaksha, anumana, vimana, sastra, artha, anubhava. All these six tools of knowledge, whether it is pratyaksha, that is direct perception, or anumana or inference, or vimana or comparison, or shabda, verbal testimony, or arthavati or anubhalabdhi. None of these six pramanas can fully reveal the nature of the absolute reality. Now the Bhashya discusses this point. Antavantaha Anto vinashu vidyate yesham te antavanta yatha mrigatushnigado sadbuddhi anuvritta pramana nirupadandi vichhidyati sa tasyaha anta tatha ime dekhaha swapnamaya dehadivaccha antavanta nityasya sharirinaha shariravatāha anashinaha aprameyasya atmanaha antavanta iti ukta vivekibhi ityartha. So Bhashyakara says, all these bodies, all these empirical phenomenal entities have an end. So they are called antavanta. But behind this destructible, perishable entities, there is one indestructible, imperishable, eternal, deathless self, the Atman. And that Atman is Nitya, it is eternal, it always exists, it doesn't undergo any change, like birth, existence, growth, evolution, decay or death, jayade, asti, varthade, viparinamade, apakshyade, vinashyati. it is Nitya. It remains the same in the past, present and future. It is Trikala Abadhita. And it is Avasthatraya Abadhita. That Atman, once you realize the fact that it is the same seer, the perceiver, the drashta, the eternal witness in the three states of consciousness, three states of awareness, that is Jagra state, the waking state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state. Now Bhashyakara says, he gives an example. The example is Marumarichika Dushtanta. Now a mirage which appears as real at first, that is when you see an expanse of sand from a distance, and when sunlight reflects on the sand, we may mistake that sand for a pool of water. It may resemble a pool of water, but it disappears when you come close to that object. You realize it is only sand. So it appears to be real at first, but later when you come close to it, you understand it is not real. When you get a proper perspective, you realize the fact it is only a misunderstanding. So it is something that appears to be real, but later proved to be unreal. So it has an end. So also all these empirical entities, including our human body, which constitute only an outer cover for the indweller, which is Atman, which is the self. And that Atman is Nitya, is eternal, it cannot be destroyed, so it is Avinasi, it is indestructible, and it cannot be perceived as we perceive these empirical objects using our mind or intellect and the five senses of perception like the eyes, ears, and so on. The Bhashyakara continues, Nityasya saririnaha sarirvataha anasinaha aprameyasya atmanaha antavanta iti ukta vivekibhi. So those who have realized the truth consider these outer coverings to be antavanta, to be not eternal. They come to an end. At the same time, the Atman, which is the indweller within all these entities, is unchanging and eternal and incomprehensible. Nityasya anasinaha iti punaruktam nityatvasya dividhatva loke nasasya cha. So the verse says, this Atman has neither partial destruction, it doesn't undergo either partial destruction or total complete destruction. So here there is a possibility of doubts. Many people may mistake it is a problem here, that is punarukti dosha. So there is a repetition of the same idea. The epithets Nitya and Avinasi, eternal and indestructible, may be mistaken to be repetitions of the same ideas and therefore could be redundant. There is a possibility for such a criticism because people may mistake, people may not fully able to understand the subtle difference between Avinasi and Nitya. So Bhashyakara says, Na punaruktam nityatvasya dividhatva loke nasasya. Because normally when we observe different things in the world, we come to experience two types of destruction. One is, for example, the human body. When we become sick or when we become frail, it is called Vyadhigrasta Kshinita Shariram. In the commentaries you say. So this body, we may become weak. So Sariro Nashta, we may use that expression. The body has gone. It doesn't mean that body has disappeared. It only means we have become weak. So it is a kind of partial destruction. When the body becomes frail or weak due to some illness, we may shariram vyadhigrasta kshinita shariram, means because the body has become weak or frail due to some illness. So deho me nashta, my body has gone. We may use such expressions. It is only a very informal way of using language. And of course there is another kind of destruction. When people die, their body may be burned to ashes. So bhasmi bhutam sari. So that is another kind of destruction. So these are two possible types of destruction that we may encounter in the world of empirical external objects. So Bhashyakara says the text Bhagavad Gita uses these two adjectives, Nitya and Avinashi, to rule out the possibility of both these two types of destruction. That means Nitya and Avinashi together rule out the possibility of both partial and also total destruction of this Atman. This Atman remains the same without any change, without any modification. And so the discussion will continue. So Nityasya Sharirinaha Shariravatakha Anashinaha Aprameyasya Atmanaha Antavanda Idukta Vivegibhihi Ityartha. Yatha Deho Bhasmi Bhuda Adasyanam Gado Nashtai Uchyade Vidyamanaha Api. The body is still existing. Still, we may, in a very informal language, we may use the word Gado Nashta. Deha Nashta. So, we may use such expression. So, Anandagiri says, Nityatvasya Dvaididya Siddhyartham Nasa Dvaididhyam Padignyadam Prakadayadi Yatha. So, the great Tikakara Anandagiri, writing on Shankaracharya's commentary, says this particular sentence, Yatha Dehu Bhasmi Bhutaha Adasyanam Gato Nashtaka Uchyade Vidyamanaha Abhi Anyatha Parinato Vyadhyadi Yukto Jato Nashta Uchyade. So, this particular sentence is introduced to rule out the possibility of both partial destruction of some things, like the body of a person who has fallen sick, or the complete disappearance. As an old man, when he dies, his body is burned to ashes according to traditional Hindu customs. So that is a kind of complete total destruction. Atman doesn't undergo any of these two types of destruction. So Nityatvasya Dvaididya Siddhyartham. There are two types of Nitya. So in order to establish the fact the Atman is beyond any kind of partial or total destruction, the text uses these two adjectives, Nitya and also Avinashi. Tatra anashino nityasya iti dividhena api nashena asambandha asya ityartha. So we already discussed this matter. The indestructible and eternal Atman is connected. These two terms together establish the fact that Atman is beyond any kind of partial or total destruction. So here the great great Advaitin Madhusudana Saraswati as something very, very profound to say in this context. So in Madhusudana's commentary in Gudartha Deepika, there is a Puravaksha that is raised. So Puravaksha says, Nanu nityatvam yavatkarasthayitvam tathacha avidyadivat karena sakanasi api tat upamannam ityada aha anashina iti deshada kaladu vastudascha parichinnasya avidyadehi kalpidatvena anitye api yavatkarasthayitvam aupacharikam nityatvam vyavakriyate. So this is a reply. So first we will deal with the Puravaksha, which is very relevant in this context. So Madhusudana introduces a Puravaksha. So here Puravaksha may be raising this objection. Now, does not this Nityatvam mean Yavatkarasthayitvam? That means lasting as long as the time lasts. So that's a very, very relative term. So Nanu Nityatvam Yavatkarasthayitvam. So perhaps the word Nitya is used in this text not in the sense of eternal, beyond any kind of modification in the past, present and future, as Advaitins proclaim, but rather in a different sense. That is Madhusudana's text proposes a possible objection, a criticism of Shankaracharya's interpretation. So perhaps the objector, Puravaksha, says, perhaps this Nityatvam only means lasting as long as it lasts or time lasts. So in that case, Nityatvam becomes fully justifiable, even though it gets destroyed along with time. So the example is given, Avidyadivat. Avidya is ignorance. Avidya has no beginning but is an end. We don't know when Avidya emerges because Avidya really doesn't have an entity, so we don't know. There is no answer to the question when Avidya emerges. So it is called Avidya is Anadi. But Avidya comes to an end when you get the final realization that you are the Atman, you are the indestructible, eternal, aprameya, that is incomprehensible Brahman or Atman. When you realize your true nature, then Avidya immediately disappears. So Avidya is Santa, it has an end, though it has no beginning. So this is the possible objection that Puravaksha raises. So Madhusudana himself gives the reply. On the basis of the text of the Bhashyam, Madhusudana gives the reply. Ityadaha anashinidi. Deshada kaladu vastudascha parichinnasya avidyadehi kalpidatvena anityatve api yavat kalasthayitvam aupacharikam nityatvam vivakriyate. So Madhusudana says, though avidya etc. They have a kind of temporal or objective limitation. They are non-eternal because they are only superimpositions. They kalpidatvena anityatve. So they are only superimpositions. Avidya is not absolutely real. It is only if we feel the influence of avidya due to superimpositions, or avidya manifests in the form of superimposition. So though this avidya etc., which has spatial, temporal and objective limitations, they are non-eternal because they are only superimpositions. Still they are spoken of empirically in conventional language as eternal. But that is only very figurative way of putting things. So, because they exist, they coexist with time. So it is called Yavat Kala Sthayitvam Aupacharikam. So their Nityatvam is only Aupacharika. We have agreed in the empirical sense. We may feel in a very informal way, we may say this avidya is eternal, but actually they are not eternal. But this Atman actually is, it is not something imagined, and it is devoid of all limitation, and it is unchangeable. So the Nityatvam or eternality of Atman is unchangeable. It is not an upacharya, it is not an informal, conventional or figurative sense in which we say the Atman is eternal, Atman is Nitya. It is in the absolute paramarthika sense that we use the word Nitya and Avinashi with regard to Atman. Not in the same sense in which we may use the same word Nitya with regard to many other things. Even at the relative level, we may perhaps think the earth is more Nitya. Relatively speaking, the earth on which trees grow may be considered to be Nitya in relation to the trees that grow on the earth. The trees come and go, but the earth on which those trees grow as plants and grow into big trees, the earth is relatively eternal compared to the trees. But even the earth itself is actually non-eternal. It is only an empirical entity compared to Atman, which never undergoes any kind of change, which remains the same in the past, present and future. Even this earth itself is not eternal. It may exist for several billions of years, but it cannot exist for all time. It comes into existence sometime in the past, exists maybe for billions or millions of years, and may disappear at some point of time in the distant future. So in that sense, even the earth is not Nitya or eternal like the Atma. So, and then Bhashyam, the great commentator, Padasudana, here quotes one relevant sutra from Brahma Sutra. Yavat vikaram tu vibhago lokavat iti nyaya. This is Brahma Sutra from 2nd chapter, 3.7. So, Madhusudana quotes, Yavat vikaram tu vibhago lokavat, means it is separateness, vibhaga, persists wherever there is a vikara, an effect. Yavat vikaram tu vibhago lokavat. So separateness or distinction persists wherever there is an effect or a change, and example is given as seen in the world, that is lokava. So Madhusudana quotes is Brahma Sutra in this particular context. Tatra anashino nityasya iti vividhena api nashena sambandha asya ityartha. Anyatha पृथिव्यादिवत् अपि नित्यत्वं स्यात् आत्मनः तत् मा भूत् इति नित्यस्य अनाशिनः इति आह. So the Bhashya continues, why the nitya and anash and avinashi or anash is used. The example is given. Perhaps there is a possibility that some people may interpret that the nityatvam or eternality of Atman is only relative, as the eternal nature of the earth is supposed to be more, it is established in relation to the trees or maybe the mountains that may be found on the surface of the earth. The trees may come and go, but earth remains. So earth is relatively, comparatively eternal. It is a kind of relative eternality. It is apekshika nityatvam. So it is not apekshika nityatvam that we are discussing in connection with Atman. Atman is eternal in the paramarthika sense, in the absolute sense. Aprameyasya na prameyasya pratikshadi pramanaihi aparichedisya ityartha. Now, again, this Atman is now called aprameya, incomprehensible. The real implication is incomprehensible in the empirical sense. So Atman cannot be perceived or cognized or understood or objectified as we can perceive, understand and objectify empirical objects. When we see an object, our eyes and mind come together and we come to know of something that is visual. And when our ears, the sense of hearing and mind come together, then we comprehend the existence of something which produces a noise. So also we come to know of the taste of something when the sense of taste and mind come together. Now Atman cannot be perceived in this way. So in that sense, Atman is said to be incomprehensible. Atman is not pratyaksha siddha. Atman, the eternal nature of Atman cannot be realized or understood, even intellectually comprehended through pratyaksha, anumana, upamana or sabda. Though Shastram or verbal testimony have some importance, still, unlike some other religious traditions, we do not say that one particular book contains the whole truth. Truth is beyond books and truth is beyond words. Truth is a matter of our inner spiritual experience and realization. But we may get a lot of help from books, from great scriptures, the great religious scriptures of the world, of all great religious traditions, constitute a great help for us to remove wrong notions about the true nature of Atman. But the true nature of Atman is realized as at the end of our inner spiritual journey as a matter of aparokshanubhuti or spiritual realization. This is the view of Vedanta. So, nanu agamena atma parichidide pratyakshadina cha purvam. So, here is again a Purvapaksha is raised. This Atman can be understood or determined by the scriptures. And before that, pratyaksha pramana. No, in response to this objection, the Advaita says, no. Na atmanaga swadasiddhatva. So, Atman is self-determined. Atman reveals, Atman is self-revealed. Siddhehi atmani pramatari pramitsoho pramananveshana bhavati. So, when we know ourselves, that is, when we have an idea of what we are, then only we are able to go in search of truths in the scriptures. When the knower self knows that there is such a thing as the eternal, the nitya, avinashi, aprameya Atman, then only a spiritual seeker turns to books and scriptures to understand the nature of Atma. So the Anandagiri says, Atmanaga sarvaloka prasiddhatva cha tasminna pramanam anveshaniyam. That's an important statement from Anandagiri. So Anandagiri says, Atmanaga sarvaloka prasiddhatva cha tasminna pramanam anveshaniyam. Of course, in the course of discussion, the Bhashyam is going to quote an important statement from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which makes it very clear. Yes, Sakshat Aparoksha Brahma, Ya Atma Sarvantara, that we are going to discuss later. Nahi Purvam Itham Aham Iti Atmanam Aprameya, Paschat Prameya Parichedaya Pravartadi. Nahi Atma Nama Kasyachit Aprasiddho Bhavati. So, first of all, we will have some understanding of our true nature. So, without first getting some idea of the nature of Atma, no one will go in search of this absolute reality. No one will turn to any of the pramanas to understand this absolute reality. So Bhashyam says, Shastram tu antyam pramanam Adhyatma Vidya nivartakatvena pramanatvam atmani pradipajyate natu ajnanadartha jnapakatvena. So there's a very important statement from the Bhashyam. Shastra, scripture, it is the final authority, but it only helps us to remove wrong notions, to remove the superimposition, to remove the wrong notions that we normally entertain with regard to Atman. So the example is taken from the analogy of a dark room and a piece of rope lying there. Suppose there is a piece of rope lying in a room which is not well lit, with somewhat dim. So when we bring light, when we switch on the electric switch, or when we bring light, or when we open the doors and windows, we realize the fact that it is a rope. Before that, we may mistake the rope for a snake, sarpa, jaladhara, we may mistake it for a thin stream of water, we may mistake it for a curved stick, a danda, and we may mistake it for a crack on the floor, depending upon the color or maybe the shape of the rope that's lying there. So there are various ways of mistaking a rope for many other things. So when we bring light, what happens is the light doesn't necessarily reveal the rope. The light only removes darkness. And once darkness is removed, then the rope is self-revealed. Even if we don't bring light, the rope doesn't become a snake or a thin stream of water or anything. It remains the rope. So what the light does is limited to removing darkness, which stands in the way of our recognizing the fact that it is only a piece of rope. Similarly, all the scriptures which constitute the Shastram, Moksha Shastra, all scriptures are helpful because these scriptures give us some right notions, right ideas about the absolute reality. But going beyond the scriptures, going beyond the words, we have to undertake our own inner spiritual journey, which will help us to realize our Atma. So that's the ultimate goal. A word by itself is sacred only to the extent that it removes wrong knowledge. So also a text or a scripture is important. That is true. So a scripture may be, we can call it Antyam Shastram to Antyam Pramanam, the final authority. Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana and other pramanas may not help us in many ways. So we turn to sacred scriptures, which contain ideas and teachings from great sages who have realized the supreme truth. But then, understanding those ideas is not the end of our spiritual journey. Going beyond those ideas, we must realize those ideas in our own life. Then we turn our inquiry inward, and then we come back to our own true nature, which is Atma. That's why Shastram tu Antyam Pramanam Adhyatma Adhyaropana Nivartakatvena Pramanatvam. So, Shastram tu Antyam Pramanam. Shastram tu Ajnana Nivartakam na Jnana Pravartakam. In the Mandrikakarya Bhashya elsewhere, Bhashyakara says, Shastram Ajnana Nivartakam. It removes wrong intellectual notion, idea that we may entertain. It doesn't mean that belief in a created God is wrong. Advaita doesn't deny the reality of monotheistic concepts of created God. Advaita fully honors, accepts and respects those ideas. But Advaita tells you should go even beyond that. So it's a matter of our own inner spiritual journey. So once we go beyond rituals, beyond philosophy, beyond Shastram, beyond theology and philosophy and discussions and debates, and reach our inner experience, then we understand this Atman is one eternal reality, the divine spark, that is the Antaryami, the indweller in all of us. So indirectly we can say this is the foundation of interfaith harmony, because Advaita alone can give you a perfect philosophical spiritual foundation for interfaith harmony. In that respect, it is a universal spiritual ethical philosophy, because it tells us that the ultimate experience of spiritual life is of the realization of the fact that we are spiritually one. The same Atman, the same divine presence is present in all of us. Before we reach this stage, it is perfectly okay, perfectly alright to believe that God created this world on a fine morning, nothing wrong in it. So belief in a created God is perfectly alright, but there is another higher state in our spiritual evolution, and at that stage we realize that this reality, this transcendental God is in the ultimate spiritual analysis, the divine reality present in all of us. And all the books of the world, all the Shastras, verbal testimony are helpful to remove wrong notions. For example, we may have many fanatical ideas, wrong ideas. So when we read great texts like Bhagavad Gita, or the Upanishads, or Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel, or the Sermon on the Mount, or the Dhammapada of the great Buddhist scripture, then we get some very wonderful positive ideas of God, the nature of the absolute reality. And then we should strive further and continue our inner spiritual journey and should reach the experience level of this idea. That's the implication. So Bhashyakara quotes from Bhagavad Gita, Tathaja Shruti, Yat Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma, Ya Atma Sarvantara. So this Atman, it is not Pratiksha Pramana, but is directly perceptible. Because it is the Antaryami, the indweller of all beings, Bhagavad Gita, say the 3rd chapter. So this Atma is not Pratiksha Siddha, because we cannot perceive the Atman with our mind and the 5 senses of perception. The way I can see a book, I cannot realize Atman, because it is something that's to be realized within our own inner self as a result of our own spiritual evolution. So it is not Pratyaksha Siddha, but it is not Paraksha, it is not remote either. It is not direct and it is not remote, because it is our true nature, it is our own nature, so it cannot be removed. So it is called Yat Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma. Yasma evam nityaha avikriya cha atma tasma yudhyasva yuddha uparamamma kashihi ityartha. So Bhashyakara concludes here. So this Atma is Yat Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma, because it is our own Suswarupa. And this is a matter of inner experience. Once we realize this, then we will not shun, we will not run away from duties and responsibilities due to wrong misunderstanding. So Lord Krishna advises Arjuna. Therefore Arjuna being a soldier whose duty was to protect the weak, the women folk, the common people, the unarmed people from evildoers. So it was a duty, it was the sacred duty and responsibility, the spiritual responsibility of Arjuna was to protect the women folk, the old people, the children and the innocent people from evildoers. And for that, as a soldier, it was his duty. He was deluded by wrong notions. So he was trying to run away from his duties and responsibilities. And Lord Krishna says, therefore, you should fight, because as a soldier, your duty is to protect these people from evil. Therefore, it is your spiritual responsibility to help people by protecting them from evil. Nahi atra yuddha tattwamaya vidya. This is a very important point, remember. So, Lord Krishna is not telling Arjuna that you must fight, not at all. Arjuna being a soldier, whose duty was to protect the good people, the innocent people, the unarmed people, the weak people from evildoers. So Krishna tells you should do your duty. If Arjuna was a farmer, Lord Krishna would have asked him to do farming properly. Similarly, Yuddhe pravutta eva hi asau shokamoha pranibadhyaha tushnim asti tasya kartavya pranibandha apanayana matram bhagavada kriyade. So Lord Krishna's main purpose behind this advice was this. Arjuna was trying to run away from his duties and responsibilities due to shoka, due to grief and moha, delusion. Lord Krishna only wants to protect him from the sin of running away from his duties and responsibilities. Tasma yudhyasva iti anuvada matram na vidhi. So it is not an injunction, it is only an approval, it is only an anuvada, an approval, not an injunction. This idea. So see, yudhyasva is not vidhi. That is an important point, remember, because very often this particular sentence could be interpreted, it was interpreted by Jnana Karma Samuchayavadis as a kind of permission for combining Jnana and Karma. So Yudhyasva was wrongly interpreted by some pre-Shankarite commentators as a vidhi, as an injunction. So in order to emphasize the point, it is not a vidhi, Bhashyakara says, it is anuvada matram. That's it. Swadharme yuddhe prak pravrittasya tavat tasma ubaradi na yukta iti aniknya bhagavana. Excellent. Now the Bhashya continues. यत्तु मन्यसे युद्धे भीष्मादयो मया हन्यन्ति अहमेव तेषां हन्ता इति एषा बुद्धि मृषा एव ते कथम्. Now another important topic is brought out in connection to this. Suppose you think, well, if I fight to protect good people, virtuous people from evildoers, and in the process I have to face Bhishma, Drona and others, and if they happen to be killed in the battle, though it's a righteous duty, and then what happens? In that case, how do you justify? Bhishma and others may be killed, and then I will be their slayer. I will be the one responsible for it. So if you have got such a wrong notion, then we are going to address this. So the 19th verse is introduced here. Ye enam veti hantaram yaschainam manyate hatam ubhau tau na vijanito nayam khanti na hanyate. It's a very famous verse which was taken up by the great American transcendentalist and mystic Emerson in his Brahma, which is almost a kind of different interpretation is given, but Emerson takes up this idea in his famous poem called Brahma. Whoever knows him, the Atman, as a slayer, and whoever knows this Atman as a slain, both these are ignorant. They do not know the true nature, because Atman is eternal. This is the famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, very often this verse interpreted and maybe used by Emerson in the first verse of Brahma is very often misunderstood or misinterpreted by many scholars as a symbolism of Hindu mythology, or as a kind of as a reflection of or the presentation of the Hindu belief in reincarnation. Actually, this verse in the original text, the Bhagavad Gita, it only reveals, it emphasizes the immortality, the eternal nature, the indestructible nature of Atman, which is Nitya, Avinashi, Aprameya, which is Sat, which is Atma, which is called Brahman or Paramatma. So Emerson's poem goes like this: if the red slayer think he slays, or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pause and turn again. So frequently, as I mentioned, this is very often a poem of 16 lines divided into 4 quatrains. This is frequently interpreted as a kind of representation of the law of karma and the continuity of jiva. But in the Bhagavad Gita, it is used to emphasize the eternal nature of Atman, which goes through so many life cycles, and this Atman in his embodied dimension as Jivatma goes through all these life cycles, and these life cycles come to an end when that Jivatma realizes his identity with Paramatman or Brahman. So that's the important point to remember. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, elsewhere, of course, Lord Krishna himself mentioned this, the beginning of this text. You can find it there. Dekhinosmin yatha dekhe kaumaram yavvanam jara tatha dehandra praptihi dhirastatranam mukhe. So asmin dekhe kaumaram yavvanam jara tatha dehandra praptihi. So all these different stages of bodily evolution, then birth, boyhood, youth, middle age, old age, death and rebirth. All these changes take place, but these changes do not affect the Atma. These changes are different stages in the evolution of Atman manifesting in association with the body-mind complex, that is Jiva. But when that Jiva, as a result of its spiritual practices, realizes its eternal nature, its identity with the Brahman, then these life cycles come to an end. That is the implication. So, Bhashyakara here introduces the idea Antavantaha, Anto Vinasho Vidyade Yeshante Antavanta. The idea is this: these bodies constitute only the outer shells, the envelopments of the Atman, which is actually the indweller, and which is Anasi, Aprameya and Nitya. All these ideas are repeated again. It is eternal, indestructible and incomprehensible. So they have an end, Antavant. But behind these empirical things which are not indestructible, and within, as an indweller, behind these empirical things, there is the indestructible, the eternal, the changeless Atma. Those things which have an end are called Antavanta. So, Antavanta, Anto Vinasho Vidyade Yeshante Antavanta. Yatha Mrgadushnigado Sadbuddhi. So, we already discussed. Now we are coming to the 19th verse, so they are interrelated. Whoever knows or thinks by mistake that this Atman is a slayer, the Atman is a karta, and this Atman undergoes karma, this Atman is slaying, both of them are ignorant, they do not know the true nature. Ye enam pragutam dehinam veti janati hantaram hanana kriyayaha kartara. He who knows this Atman as the agent of act of any action, either killing or any kind of action, he doesn't know the true nature of Atman, because Atma is akarta abhokta. No action can take place without the presence of Atman in all of it. But Atman by itself is not karta. When Atman manifests through these karmendriyas or jnanendriyas and mind and intellect, then only actions take place. So Atman by itself is not an agent of action. And Atman also doesn't undergo the result of any action. Janati hantaram hanana kriyayaha kartaram. Yascha enam anyo manyade khatam deva hanena khata aham iti hanana kriyayaha karma bhutam. So this Atman is not subjected to any action. It is not the enjoyer of the result of any action. And those who look upon this Atman as either karta or karma phala bhokta do not know the true nature of Atman. They are ignorant of its true nature. Tau bhau na vijanito na janavanto avivekena atmanam akam pratyaya vishayam. This Atman is akam pratyaya vishayam. When we turn our inquiry inward and understand our true nature, then we realize that our true nature is one eternal witness. And a witness doesn't participate in the action. The witness remains aloof. But in this case there is a difference. Without the presence of Atman, or kanme, karmendriyas or jnanendriyas, senses of action or senses of perception, or mind and intellect cannot do anything. So action is not possible, but action takes place only at the level of indriya, karmendriyas and jnanendriyas and mind. Atman itself is not directly involved in any kind of kriya or karma phala. That is the important. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Pranam.